Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending from where you are joining. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this virtual launch of a joint publication by the Organization of American States, the OAS, and the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, UNIDIR. This publication focuses on the 11 norms for responsible state behavior in cyberspace and how we can implement them in a gender-sensitive way. I am Renata Dall'Acqua, and I'm delighted to be here today with all of you. I work at UNIDIR, where I lead the Gender and Disarmament Program. The main objectives of our work are to promote gender equality and the effective integration of gender perspectives across all areas of arms control and disarmament, including cybersecurity. Together with the Cybersecurity section of the Inter-American Committee Against Terrorism at the OAS, we've been collaborating with the experts that are here today. We've been collaborating on a research project, and the English version of the research report was launched in May during the Geneva Cyber Week. And today we are launching the Spanish version of the report. This report, for those of you who haven't read it yet, it is grounded in the Women, Peace and Security agenda and in case studies from the Americas. It outlines how cyber threats can impact individuals differently based on gender, and it provides practical guidance for applying a gender lens to the interpretation and implementation of the norms of responsible state behavior. We have a very interesting event ahead of us, but before I go over the program, I would like to share some basic instructions. First, I would like to note that today's event is being recorded and it will be made available on YouTube later on. I would also like to share that the presentations and the discussions, they will be held in Spanish and in English with simultaneous interpretation. You can select the language by clicking on the globe icon in the Zoom platform. I would also like to note that the opinions expressed in this event do not necessarily reflect the views of the United Nations, of UNIDIR, or OAS, or the governments of its member states. These are experts who will be speaking on their own capacity. Now I would like to do a little bit of promotion and propose, suggest, ask that you follow us on social media. Here are the handles that you can find us. And then our colleagues from the OAS also have a newsletter that they would like to also suggest that you subscribe to. You can do so with the QR code. Now allow me to present today's program. We'll start with opening remarks from two great speakers and very incredible professionals. We are joined today by Izumi Nakamitsu, the UN High Representative for Disarmament Affairs. Ms. Nakamitsu assumed her post in 2017, and since then, she has been a driving force for mobilizing support for gender equality in all areas of arms control and disarmament. We will also hear from Ms. Kerry-Ann Barret, the chief of the Cybersecurity section at the OAS. And Ms. Barret, she coordinates the cybersecurity capacity building efforts that OAS provides to member states, and she's also very engaged in gender equality initiatives. After the opening remarks, we will have expert presentations by the authors of the report, Catherine Miller, who is an associate professor of international relations at the London School of Economics, and Veronica Ferrari, who is a global policy advocacy coordinator at the Association for Progressive Communications. After they present the main findings, we will have a roundtable discussion with a great group of experts. We will hear from Juan Carlos Lara, who is the Executive Director of Derechos Digitales, Chile. We will hear from Rosario Gutierrez Bernal, who is a coordinator at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Colombia. and we'll hear from Alison Pitlak, Senior Fellow and Cyber Program Director at the Stimson Center. Throughout the event, we'll be monitoring the Q&A box, and we'll have a dedicated time to answer questions from the audience. So please use the Q&A function to submit your questions at any point, and we will be looking at that and taking the questions from the Q&A box. This is what I wanted to say now at the beginning, so I think it's time to hear from our speakers. I would like now to give the floor to the UN High Representative, Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu.
Thank you very much, Renata. Thank you for the opportunity. I am really so pleased to join you for this official launch event, and also a roundtable discussion on the new publication from the Organization of American States, OAS, and UNIDIR, a novel approach to the 11 UN norms for responsible state behavior in cyberspace, guidelines for gendered implementation. Now, gender mainstreaming in cybersecurity discussions, policymaking, and capacity building remains as critical as ever. I think you all agree with that. States, of course, made significant progress in the just concluded open-ended working group on security of and in the use of information and communications technologies. With each session, the OEWG delved deeper into the gender dimensions of ICT security. It considered issues of participation, but also unpacking substantive considerations. It called for narrowing the gender-digital divide. It drew attention to the need for gender perspectives in addressing ICT threats, and it made some recommendations for gender-responsive capacity building and integration of a gender perspective into national ICT policies. At the 11th and final substantive session of the OEWG, states agreed to a new intergovernmental process, the global mechanism, set to begin in early next year, 2026. Now, with this mechanism, integration of gender considerations into ICT security must be approached in a more concrete, action-oriented way. At this critical juncture, the launch of this publication, developed by the OAS and UNIDIR, is very timely. I think the publication is an excellent resource for moving forward more concretely. It offers clear guidance to policymakers and practitioners on how to integrate gender considerations in ICT cyber policies and practices. It specifically looks at gender-sensitive interpretation of the norms of responsible state behavior. I think while some states call for such gender-sensitive norm interpretation, concrete guidance on how to conduct this had been seriously lacking. So this publication fills this knowledge gap. So I wish to highlight a fundamental understanding that lies at the heart of this publication and with which I strongly agree. Effective ICT security and gender equality are mutually reinforcing objectives. Gender mainstreaming of ICT security ultimately improves security at all levels, and that is states, communities, and individuals. At the same time, enhancing the security and stability of the ICT domain can and should promote gender equality. Gender matters for ICT security, from addressing gendered assumptions and values in policy and practice to gender-differentiated effects of ICT threats. So I want to emphasize here the conventional understanding of ICT security as only a technical issue is simply insufficient and essentially limits our progress. Now, in the context of the global mechanism that is to start next year, I hope states will seriously consider how to ensure there is scope to tackle gender mainstreaming in a substantive and a meaningful way. And from the outset, discussions should move from theoretical to concrete. Drawing on the guidance contained in the OAS UNIDIR publication, some suggestions include the following. Collection of gender disaggregated data on ICT-related incidents, which would foster an inclusive, evidence-based approach to ICT security. The second is elaboration of guidance on gender-sensitive norm implementation. The OAS UNIDIR publication includes highly useful guiding questions for each norm, which could inform guidance. States could also consider how to integrate gender considerations into the voluntary checklist of practical actions for norms implementation contained in the third annual progress report of the OEWG. And the third, supporting gender-sensitive capacity building, including through template checklists or questionnaires. States have recognized the value of such checklists and questionnaires in identifying needs and gaps. I also note the value of technical and policy capacity building efforts directed specifically towards women. So there have already been some gains. On the issue of participation, we have seen tremendous progress towards gender parity in the ICT security intergovernmental discussions. At the July this year, 2025 OEWG session, when the final report was adopted, 53% of interventions were made by women delegates. This really demonstrates a stark increase in women's participation since the first session in December 2021, when only 1/3 of statements were made by women. Women in Cyber Fellowship Program has been, I think, a particular shining example, which has helped increase the participation of women. Now, at the United Nations, we will continue to advocate for gender balance in all multilateral discussions on science and technology. And I believe we have strong member state support for that. In the Pact for the Future, states called for measures to address barriers to women's participation in science and technology. They also recognize the gender-related risks emerging from the use of technologies, including bias and gender-based violence. It is more relevant than ever to underscore the acknowledgement by states of the need to address these issues. And of course, the Secretary General is strongly committed to gender equality, including by achieving gender parity in international security negotiations. And also various studies have shown that negotiations with women, especially in the context of peace negotiations, are more likely to produce durable outcomes. But it is also a question of equity. Disarmament and international security matters, including ICTs, impact everyone, men and women alike, and decisions on policy should be representative of this as well. So with that, I once again congratulate OAS and UNIDIR for this publication on this important topic, and I wish you fruitful discussions in this event, and muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nakamitsu. Thank you for your words and most of all for your leadership. We understand you have other commitments and may need to leave earlier, so I just want to express my gratitude right now. Now I would like to give the floor to our second opening speaker, Ms. Kerry-Ann Barret from the OAS.
Thank you so much, Renata. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for wherever you are today. It's truly a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Organization of American States. Today's launch really brings together voices from across regions and institutions. All of us are united by one common vision, bringing a cyberspace that's more secure, inclusive, and resilient. Let me begin by expressing my sincerest gratitude and thanks to Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu for her joining us today and her inspiring words. I think her elaboration of her takeaways from the report is very timely, and it does point us to some of the salient conclusions that the report made. So thank you so much, Izumi. I also want to thank Renata, Dominic, and the rest of the UNIDIR team who've been outstanding. For those of you who don't know, over the past few years, we've had a strong partnership with UNIDIR, including the signing of an MOU, which has advanced research on the gender dimensions of cybersecurity and fostered dialogue on the application of international law in cyberspace. I want to thank our authors of the publication, Catherine and Veronica, because their work has been resulting in us having a new human rights-based perspective on state behavior in cyberspace. It's a novel research, and we know that it can only contribute to the discussions going forward. To our panelists, Alison, Rosario, and Juan Carlos, thank you for bringing your expertise and voices to today's launch. We really look forward to hearing how you will reflect on the topic. And to all of you who are here, your presence makes it meaningful. We've taken this to several forums already, the Open-Ended Working Group, we've taken it to Geneva, Cyber Week, and now we're here for this global conversation. Over the past 2 decades, the OAS specifically has been working to build and strengthen cybersecurity capacities across the Western Hemisphere. A core part of this mission has always been to ensure that as we look at cybersecurity, it is not just technical, as Izumi said. It is generally looking at how do we find novel approaches to addressing the issues. So at the OAS, we apply our core principles of democracy, human rights, development, and multidimensional security when we think of cyber. With the generous support of Canada, we had launched our Cinder project back in 2022. And since then, we have been able to impact the root causes of gender inequality in cyber. We have reached more than 6,000 plus persons in 29 member states through gender-sensitive cyber capacity building. We've trained over 1,500 women and girls in digital skills and encouraging them to join a cybersecurity career. And we've done over 26 initiatives that directly impact women's participation, including launching our Women in Cybersecurity Empowerment Network. We've delivered several communities, training to several communities at risk. We believe that thinking about how we do awareness raising as well is important to have gender-related cyber threats. This report today builds on all of the work I've just mentioned. It's our joint vision with UNIDIR that we have a more inclusive and effective approach to cyber governance that provides something that we believe is urgently needed: practical guidance to translate high-level commitments into meaningful, gender-responsive action and implementation on the ground. As you are all aware, and as elaborated by Izumi a few moments ago, both at the UN and regional level, it has been underscored the importance of closing the digital divide, ensure inclusive capacity building, and promoting gender balance in cyber diplomacy more specifically. The call for more inclusive and equitable cybersecurity governance is growing stronger, but we must now move from just conversations to action. This publication will help you with that. It offers a very clear and actionable roadmap grounded in women, peace, and security agenda, and it enriches the reach with regional cases from the Americas. It goes beyond exploring how gender perspectives can be integrated as just a topic, but show you how practically this can be done and what work has already been done. One of our goals today is to make these good practices visible to your audience. We know there is much more work still to be done. That is why today is so important. The speakers today for our roundtable builds on not just us having a launch, but actually an invitation for you to reflect on how far we have come and what do we think are the next steps that we need together to bring the discussions into the new global mechanism on ICT and international security. Let me close once again by thanking our authors, Undersecretary General, our colleagues at UNIDIR, the OAS team, and the Government of Canada for their vision and support. Cyber resiliency depends on diverse perspective. If we actually fail to recognize the gendered impacts of cyber threats and technologies, we risk reinforcing existing divides and leaving critical vulnerabilities unaddressed. Thank you all for listening, and the floor is back to you, Renata.
Thank you very much, Kerry-Ann. And it's been a pleasure working with you and the team at OAS. And now that we've heard different perspectives on the main findings, on the report, gave a bit of an overview of what the topic is about. I would like actually to invite the authors of the report to tell us about the research, how they structured it, what were the objectives, and what were the findings of this project. For those who haven't had the chance to read the report yet, they can hear directly from the authors. So I'd like to give the floor now to Kate Miller and Veronica Ferrari. I understand Veronica is starting. So Veronica, the floor is yours.
Gracias, Renata. Espero me escuchen bien. Muchas gracias por la posibilidad de estar aquí. Soy Verónica Ferrari, trabajo con la Asociación para el Progreso de las Comunicaciones, APC. Somos una organización de la sociedad civil que trabaja en temas de género, derechos humanos y justicia social. Y soy una de las coautoras del informe junto con Kate Miller. Y de vuelta queremos agradecerle a los equipos de UNIDIR y de la OEA, el equipo de Cyber, por la colaboración, por el apoyo en todo este proyecto de investigación. Y a todas y todos por acompañarnos hoy. Nos alegra mucho ser parte de este lanzamiento, tener el informe en español y también tener una conversación sobre el informe y cómo esto puede servir para el trabajo de los distintos actores trabajando en ciberseguridad. Y gracias a los colegas de la OEA que me van a ayudar con la presentación. Si podemos pasar a la siguiente filmina. Esta presentación busca darles una visión general de esta nueva publicación, ahora disponible en español, que, como dijeron en las palabras de inicio, busca dar un marco, unas directrices para poder aplicar una perspectiva de género a las 11 normas de Naciones Unidas sobre el comportamiento responsable de los estados en el ciberespacio. Es un informe bastante extenso, entonces vamos a tratar de brevemente presentarles un poco el contexto del proyecto, incluyendo cómo se relacionan género y ciberseguridad, luego objetivos del proyecto, cómo lo llevamos a cabo, cuál fue el enfoque. Vamos a dar un ejemplo del análisis de 2 de las normas y algunas recomendaciones generales para la integración de un enfoque de género en las normas de las Naciones Unidas. De nuevo, muchas de ustedes vienen trabajando temas de género y ciberseguridad, son expertos en la materia, así que esperamos con interés escuchar opiniones, perspectivas también de cómo este marco puede ayudar en su trabajo. Entonces, si vamos a la siguiente slide, voy a tratar de hacer una breve introducción al proyecto. Muchas de las cosas ya fueron mencionadas en la apertura, pero como sabemos, las 11 normas de Naciones Unidas fueron acordadas por el grupo de expertos gubernamentales y son un marco clave para la cooperación internacional en materia de estabilidad y seguridad en el ciberespacio. Estas normas ofrecen una base compartida para que los estados definan estrategias, desarrollen capacidades y actúen de manera responsable en el ciberespacio. Las 11 normas de Naciones Unidas no abordan específicamente la cuestión de género, sin embargo, la implementación, proponemos en el informe, es dinámica y evoluciona junto con las capacidades de los estados en materia de ciberseguridad. Entonces, mirar estas normas con una perspectiva de género, también, como dijimos en la apertura, se apoya sobre trabajo importante que ya se realizó en materia de diplomacia, en materia de ciberseguridad, que viene colocando el tema de género como un aspecto muy importante en lo que tiene que ver con políticas, prácticas y normas de ciberseguridad. Entonces, breve también, porque todas probablemente estén familiarizadas con esto, de cómo procesos de Naciones Unidas en materia de ciberseguridad han reconocido la importancia de género. Y esto está también abordado más en profundidad en el reporte. El informe final del grupo del GGI vinculó las 11 normas con derechos humanos, destacando aspectos que tienen que ver con la no discriminación y la necesidad de abordar la brecha digital de género. El informe final del primer grupo de trabajo de composición abierta sobre ciberseguridad, o el Open-Ended Working Group, en 2021 subrayó la necesidad de lograr un equilibrio de género garantizar participación efectiva de mujeres en toma de decisiones sobre ciberseguridad internacional, y como sabemos se ha hecho mucho progreso. Se habló del porcentaje de intervenciones hecho por mujeres durante la última sesión de este grupo, y las personas que seguimos este proceso desde el principio hemos notado eso. Y también el informe final de este primer grupo incluyó lo que tiene que ver con necesidades de esfuerzos en materia de sensibilidad de género en los principios de desarrollo de capacidades que se discutieron en el primero de los grupos. También el informe final reconoce que las amenazas en materia de ciberseguridad afectan de manera diferenciada a distintos grupos, incluidas las mujeres y las poblaciones vulnerables. Y el segundo grupo de trabajo de composición abierta, que acaba de concluir su trabajo, enfatizó también en sus discusiones la necesidad de incorporar perspectiva de género en ciberseguridad. Se basó en los principios acordados en el primer grupo en materia de desarrollo de capacidades. Se reforzó la necesidad de que esto atienda perspectivas de género, incluida también la integración de esta perspectiva en políticas a nivel nacional en materia de tecnologías, y de nuevo en lo que tiene que ver con transversalizar el género también en implementación de normas. Varias delegaciones durante las discusiones del grupo han hecho énfasis en esto, en la necesidad de transversalizar género a la hora de implementar las normas. Esperamos que este informe ayude al futuro trabajo en esa materia. Impulsar investigaciones sobre los impactos diferenciados de los incidentes de ciberseguridad. Entonces, este informe, este reporte se basa en estas discusiones, porque como lo que identificamos es esta poca o esta falta de orientación práctica de cómo hacer para implementar esta perspectiva de género. Entonces, de alguna manera, esta investigación busca cubrir esa brecha, ofreciendo un análisis y una guía sobre cómo introducir género a la hora de interpretar y también implementar las 11 normas de Naciones Unidas. Entonces, yendo a la siguiente, también brevemente, antes de entrar en el informe, les queremos dar un poco de contexto de cómo conecta el género con ciberseguridad, cómo lo presentamos en el reporte, basado en este creciente reconocimiento de que la ciberseguridad tiene implicaciones de género, particularmente en lo que respecta, decimos en el informe, a 3 cuestiones. Lo que tiene que ver con el eje de participación, que esto está vinculado a las desigualdades de género en el acceso y el uso de Internet y tecnologías digitales, también en brechas en materia de competencias y habilidades digitales. Luego, en lo que tiene que ver con una brecha en materia de participación, tanto en la práctica y en los roles más técnicos vinculados a ciberseguridad. Hay unas estadísticas ahí en la presentación que pueden ver, basado en trabajo de UNIDIR. Y también, aunque se registraron avances importantes, sigue habiendo una brecha en participación en gobernanza y diplomacia vinculada a ciberseguridad y a tecnología más ampliamente. Y como sabemos, todavía persiste una brecha digital de género a nivel mundial que tiene que ver con el acceso a Internet, y cómo alcanzar la paridad de género sigue siendo un desafío, especialmente en países y regiones que tienen acceso más limitado a Internet. Entonces, esa es una de las primeras maneras de cómo ciberseguridad y género se conectan. Luego tiene que ver la cuestión de los supuestos y los valores de género, aparecían también en las palabras de apertura, y cómo la ciberseguridad está influenciada por estos supuestos, en cómo se diseñan las tecnologías, cómo funcionan los espacios de trabajo vinculados con la ciberseguridad, cómo se toman las decisiones. Y un supuesto importante que marcamos en el informe es la idea de la ciberseguridad, el concepto tradicional de ciberseguridad, asociado a la masculinidad, a actividades vinculadas con esto, como la defensa nacional, la seguridad de los estados, la seguridad de las empresas, mientras que tal vez tradicionalmente otras perspectivas y experiencias en el contexto de ciberseguridad suelen quedar de lado, como la de mujeres, diversidades y otros grupos vulnerables. Y por último, el tercer punto de cómo ciberseguridad y género se conectan, decimos en el informe, tiene que ver con las experiencias diferenciadas que tenemos en cuanto a las amenazas vinculadas a ciberseguridad. Un grupo tiene que ver con las amenazas que tienen motivos de género. Por ejemplo, sabemos por las estadísticas que mujeres y niñas se ven afectadas de manera desproporcionada por violencia de género digital, facilitada por las tecnologías, por ejemplo, la difusión no consentida de imágenes íntimas. Y también tiene que ver con las amenazas y los incidentes digitales y de ciberseguridad más amplios, como las filtraciones de datos médicos, vinculados, por ejemplo, a la salud reproductiva, la interrupción de servicios de salud y prestaciones médicas, que, si bien no tienen motivos de género, suelen implicar mayores riesgos para grupos en posiciones de vulnerabilidad. Y en el informe ahondamos un poco en esto a partir de uno de los casos de estudio que trabajamos. Entonces, por estas razones, en el informe lo que señalamos es que las cuestiones de género importan al interpretar e implementar las normas de las Naciones Unidas, porque básicamente ayuda a que la ciberseguridad sea más eficaz, más inclusiva para todas y todos, desde las empresas, los estados, pero también las comunidades y las personas. Entonces, volviendo al proyecto y yendo a la filmina siguiente, quiero presentarles brevemente principales objetivos y el enfoque que adoptamos a la hora de encarar esta investigación. Entonces, de nuevo, el objetivo es proporcionar estas directrices, este marco para apoyar a los estados y a otros actores que trabajan en ciberseguridad en el fortalecimiento de la estabilidad del ciberespacio internacional, al mismo tiempo que promoviendo la igualdad de género. En cuanto a la audiencia, básicamente todas las personas aquí presentes son actores de la comunidad de ciberseguridad que trabajan tanto a nivel internacional como regional, nacional, en todos los ámbitos que están cubiertos por las normas de las Naciones Unidas. Metodología, hicimos una amplia y exhaustiva revisión documental de la investigación producida hasta el momento, tanto desde la academia como de sociedad civil, como en materia de políticas internacionales y nacionales. El informe es muy interesante en ese sentido. Em, Hicimos también entrevistas con expertas trabajando en ciberseguridad, expertas y expertos, profesionales trabajando en ámbitos estatales vinculados a ciberseguridad. Hicimos un grupo focal multisectorial del que muchas de ustedes participaron. Y el borrador además fue revisado por especialistas como parte de un proceso de revisión por pares. Hicimos estudios de casos, como dijo Kerry en la apertura, en las Américas. Nos enfocamos en Canadá, en Chile y en Costa Rica. Son casos con enfoque regional, pero creemos que sus conclusiones, sus buenas prácticas se pueden aplicar a nivel global. Muy brevemente, estos casos son ejemplos positivos de cómo repensar enfoques tradicionales de ciberseguridad mediante una adopción de una visión centrada en las personas y con perspectiva de género, cómo integrar género en la diplomacia de la ciberseguridad, y acá vamos a escuchar de personas que vienen trabajando en eso, con un enfoque en la agenda de mujeres, paz y seguridad, y también cómo implementar las normas con una perspectiva de género a través de estrategias de ciberseguridad. De nuevo, entonces el enfoque tiene que ver con un análisis de género de las 11 normas de la ONU, inspirado por la Agenda de Mujeres, Paz y Seguridad, y a partir de ello proponemos un enfoque que incluye la interpretación con perspectiva de género para identificar efectos e implicaciones diferenciadas de las normas, orientación para implementarlas con perspectiva de género, que implica proponer algunas acciones concretas para promover la igualdad de género, y algunas preguntas orientadoras que pueden ayudar a implementar o a inspirar ideas para la implementación. Entonces, básicamente proponemos un marco que tiene que ver con cuáles son las implicaciones de las normas en el ciberespacio para la igualdad de género y cómo pueden interpretarse e implementarse estas normas enfocando en temas de género. Es mucha información, pero esperemos que esto les ayude a tener una idea más clara de qué se trata el informe y cómo lo encaramos. Entonces, ahora le voy a pasar la palabra a Kate, que va a presentar el análisis de dos de las normas y algunas de las recomendaciones principales.
Perfect. Thank you so much for starting out, Vero. And of course, I'll just add my thanks as well to OAS and UNIDIR for the opportunity to work with them on this project. And to yourselves, of course, again, for your interest in our research and in attending this really important to us launch event. I'll go through now our analysis of two norms, A and G, to illustrate our work before handing back to Vero. So looking at, to begin, Norm A, as we of course know, pertains to interstate cooperation for security and stability in cyberspace. And so a gender approach to Norm A means broadening the idea of security to include not just states, but also individuals and communities. And this broadened idea of security will also be gender sensitive and intersectional, meaning that it recognizes the different cybersecurity needs, risks, and capacities of women and people of diverse genders, in line with the general principles of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. We suggest that this could be accompanied by a gender analysis of all state policies and practices related to cybersecurity to ensure they don't have an adverse effect on the basis of gender. And this could be implemented by integrating gender into top-level cybersecurity strategy documents and policies, namely national cybersecurity strategies, and also, of course, then integrating cybersecurity and ICTs into women, peace, and security national action plans at the state, and indeed actually also at the regional level, something APC is currently working on. To assist in implementing Norm A in a gender-responsive way, the report offers some guiding questions for reflection, and some of these are listed here. So these are things like, what definitions of international security are commonly used, and how can they better reflect the diverse needs, capacities, and vulnerabilities of women and people of all genders? To what extent is gender equality integrated into international and regional cyber diplomacy processes, and how are efforts to achieve gender parity reflected within cyber diplomacy teams? Next one, please. We use throughout the report some examples of good practice to illustrate things that are already going on in this space. And of course, we know that you may know others, and we're excited to hear about them. In the case of Norm A, Canada's approach to cybersecurity challenges gender assumptions and links UN norm implementation with the women, peace, and security using a gender lens. And for example, and more specifically, Canada has drafted specific guidance on integrating gender equality into the implementation of the 11 UN norms, both nationally and as part of its diplomacy. Countries in the Americas with feminist foreign policies, such as Mexico, are also increasingly linking international cybersecurity discussions to the WPS agenda. And Chile has conducted a gender assessment of its national cybersecurity policy that aligns with gender-responsive implementation of all UN norms, and in this case, the sort of overarching focus of Norm A. Moving on to Norm G. As you'll recall, Norm G broadly calls on states to take appropriate measures to protect their critical infrastructure from ICT threats and participate in the creation of a global culture of cybersecurity. So a gender approach to Norm G means reviewing the definition of critical infrastructure, importantly in consultation with civil society, to reflect the different needs, experiences, and vulnerabilities of people of all genders. And noting that this also closely connects to norms F and H, which, as we know, also focus on critical infrastructure. Research in this space has documented that when ransomware incidents occur, they often shut down, of course, as we know, schools, hospitals, and care services, which then results in women often taking on more unpaid care work. And this affects their ability to earn an income and, of course, impacts their physical and emotional well-being. To implement Norm G in a gender-responsive way, states could develop emergency plans that consider gender and how they respond to major cyber incidents on critical infrastructure. States could also set up clear pathways to share information and report incidents between government, business, and really importantly, civil society and grassroots organizations to make sure that intersectional information is shared. We also suggest that cybersecurity threat modeling may be done with diverse teams and incorporate gender analysis as a regular part of its modeling practice. We also suggest in the report that building a global culture of cybersecurity can also mean making sure teams, both policy and technical teams, including those responding to cyber incidents, are diverse and gender balanced. And in the report, we link that to discussions of norms J and K as well. We also sort of highlight the importance of public information and awareness campaigns and point out that women and marginalized groups in particular should have timely, reliable information on digital security and the common risks they might face. In this context, building a global culture of cybersecurity that's gender responsive may also mean including gender in all parts of cyber capacity building and cooperation. And so thinking about those guiding questions, when we think about gendered implementation of Norm G, we could reflect on things such as how comprehensive and gender responsive are existing plans for addressing cybersecurity incidents targeting critical infrastructure? Is the plan to address these incidents informed by consultation with relevant stakeholders and, really importantly, civil society organizations? And again, thinking about how diverse are the teams responding to cyber incidents and conducting threat modeling. Does that process incorporate intersectional gender analysis? is gender incorporated throughout cyber capacity building efforts? We also have come across some really exciting examples of good practice in relation to Norm G. And so one positive example, thank you. One positive example on critical infrastructure comes from what we may recall as Costa Rica's response to major cyber incidents in 2022. As we'll remember, these incidents unfortunately disrupted for quite some time essential government services like customs, taxation, healthcare, and education with documented gender effects. So as we sort of discussed, women, for example, faced increased care burdens due to reduced access to support for children, the elderly, and individuals with special needs. Teachers reported purchasing supplies for students, including school supplies, but also food and caring supplies, in a context where they were also not able to be paid themselves. In its response and sort of learnings from this incident, Costa Rica took gender and human rights into account in its policy response through the adoption of a national cyber strategy that includes a strong focus on gender inequality. The strategy calls for gender indicators, better communication during incidents, and it addresses risks that affect people in different ways. And Costa Rica has also emphasized the importance of considering all of these different dimensions of vulnerability and experience of major cyber incidents in its international cyber diplomacy. Somewhat relatedly, thinking about that component of gender in cyber capacity building, national cybersecurity strategies and policies in Ecuador and Uruguay include action lines dedicated to promoting capacity building for groups facing inequality and vulnerability. We've also come across the program Her Cyber Tracks, which is supported by the International Telecommunications Union, alongside those important ones supported by Canada through the OEWG and via OAS we've already heard about today. And Her Cyber Track seeks to empower women in cybersecurity from different regions through specialized training and mentorship on policy and diplomacy, incident response, and justice. And as I imagine you're already thinking, the analysis of these norms and some of our interpretations and suggestions and guiding questions also connect with the central issues raised by other norms, particularly when we think about capacity building, cooperation, infrastructure, and assistance. And so some of the recommendations are relevant across multiple norms that deal with similar issues, and we flag that in the report. Okay, next slide, please. Based on the gender analysis of the norms and the good practices, what we sort of outlined in our major sort of deliverable to you, hopefully the audience in the report, is some suggestions on how to make the implementation of these 11 norms gender responsive. And I'll note that the primary focus of these ideas is on states, but we argue and sort of demonstrate why throughout the report that the meaningful implementation and oversight of these norms should involve substantial multi-stakeholder input. And so before I wrap up, I just want to quickly share some general suggestions from the report, some of which we've already heard, on how to apply a gender approach to the norms. So getting to the practical component. And so we, as mentioned, we highlight the importance of closing the gender digital divide, right? So improving access, digital literacy, and skills for women and people of diverse genders. We also emphasize the importance of ensuring gender parity and participation, right? We need more participation from people of diverse genders, women, as well as other marginalized communities across all areas of cyber norm development, planning, technical response, implementation, and really vitally evaluation. Sometimes we leave that out, but it's important. We also recommend considering mainstreaming gender in cyber policy, right? In consultation with civil society, states could include gender considerations across cybersecurity and digital policies, and again, through international cooperation and cyber capacity building. We also suggest integrating national women, peace, and security policies and national cybersecurity strategies, and conversely, mainstreaming cyber into WPS. We also suggest the collection of gender inequalities disaggregated data on people's different experiences in cyberspace, right? And this would be intersectional, gender disaggregated data on major cyber incidents, very importantly, but also on cybersecurity measures, participation, and other key areas of cyber and ICT policy. Ideally, this would be collaboratively shared and used to support more inclusive and evidence-based cyber governance and norm implementation. Alongside that, we also, as mentioned, suggest developing and prioritizing developing gender-responsive emergency plans to major cyber incidents, and especially those affecting critical infrastructure. And we also highlight the importance of inclusion and multi-stakeholder consultation as we continue to develop the international global public policy architecture for thinking about gender inequality and human rights in relation to the UN norms.
Gracias. Kate, entonces, solo para repasar y cerrar esta presentación, que reconocemos es mucha información, pero y los invitamos a leer la publicación. Y entonces, para resaltar algunos puntos clave, la idea de que la perspectiva de género no solo es una cuestión de igualdad, tiene que ver con fortalecer también la ciberseguridad. Con que si los enfoques de ciberseguridad, al no incorporar género, están pasando por alto vulnerabilidades críticas, lo que vuelve básicamente a las políticas, a las prácticas de ciberseguridad incompletas y menos eficaces, que la falta de diversidad limita el potencial de la ciberseguridad, se pierden talentos, capacidades, perspectivas distintas e innovación que traen equipos diversos, que un enfoque de género, decimos, fortalece la ciberseguridad, integra consideraciones de género, se logra ciberseguridad más inclusiva, basada en derechos, más robusta, que garantiza la protección de todas las personas. En definitiva, lo que decimos en el informe es que un enfoque de género de las normas de Naciones Unidas fortalece su implementación y con ello la seguridad y la estabilidad del ciberespacio a nivel internacional. Así que, nada, pasando a la última. Filmina, allí encuentran el enlace, un QR, un enlace para acceder a la publicación, también nuestros correos electrónicos y por supuesto pueden contactar al equipo de la OEA y al de UNIDIR. De nuevo, esperamos que este trabajo no solo contribuya para la conversación que estamos teniendo, sino también como una herramienta práctica para quienes trabajamos en este ámbito. Esta herramienta ya es útil para el trabajo que hacemos desde sociedad civil, por ejemplo. Así que agradecemos muchos comentarios sobre cómo estas ideas que compartimos pueden ser aplicadas en su propio trabajo, cómo este marco puede apoyar sus esfuerzos. Y la idea es esto, es como empezar una conversación y ojalá la podamos continuar. Así que muy interesadas también en la intervención de las expertas y expertos que van a participar ahora de la mesa. Así que de nuevo, muchas gracias por su atención.
Muchas gracias, Vero. Thank you, Kate. This was a very comprehensive presentation of the report. And I saw that my colleague Katia has shared the links to the report both in English and in Spanish in the chat. If you go there and you download this report, you will see it's very in-depth. It's around, I think, 70 pages long. It has the detailed analysis of each of the 11 norms. It has 3 case studies. So, it has a lot of content, but it also has a summary and that table that both Veronica and Kate shared in their slides. I think it's page 41. So if you just want to know a very quick shortcut, to their suggestions for gendered implementation of the 11 norms, I recommend, if you're in a hurry, you go to that page. But yeah, thank you very much, Kate and Vero. Now I would like to hear from the experts that are joining us today, who may have different views and other ideas as well around this topic. I would like to start with Juan Carlos Lara from Derechos Digitales. Juan Carlos, in your experience, what are the main challenges in terms of applying a gender approach to cybersecurity policies? And do you think this research is useful to address some of the challenges, or do you have other comments about this report? I know Chile is one of the cases that Kate and Vero did. So very much looking forward to your thoughts on this.
Bien, muchas gracias, Renata. Muy buenos días, buenas tardes a quienes asisten a este lanzamiento. Adelantándome un poco a la respuesta, quiero agradecer por la invitación a participar de este lanzamiento porque sí nos parece una herramienta muy útil. Les saludo desde Derechos Digitales. Somos una organización de sociedad civil que ha trabajado en temas relacionados con la seguridad en entornos digitales en distintos niveles y por tanto este lanzamiento es muy importante para la organización. Quiero felicitar a Kate, a Verónica por el cuidadoso trabajo de formular el contenido de este informe, por el amplio nivel de conocimiento y de recomendaciones prácticas que traen. Quiero felicitar el esfuerzo de traducción también, que hace que esto sea mucho más útil, por cierto. Y al mismo tiempo quiero destacar a través de mi respuesta a las preguntas de Renata am, el trabajo que han hecho mis colegas en derechos digitales, tanto respecto de las capas relacionadas con los incidentes de seguridad que afectan especialmente en razón de género, como también aquellas consideraciones relacionadas con políticas públicas, especialmente a nivel nacional, sin descuidar el diálogo a nivel regional como también a nivel global. Respondiendo más directamente a la pregunta sobre los desafíos para implementar un enfoque de género en general en materia de ciberseguridad y en particular en lo que se refiere a las 11 normas no vinculantes de comportamiento responsable de los estados en el ciberespacio. Creo que hay cosas que cabe mencionar que están muy bien representadas en el informe, pero que conversan muy bien con nuestra experiencia como organización de la sociedad civil. Uno de esos puntos está relacionado con un marco de comprensión y con prácticas que tienden todavía a ser insensibles a las diferencias de género. Am, el lenguaje utilizado durante la presentación del informe habla de esta visión que reproduce normas masculinas, normas patriarcales, en el fondo, de cómo se entienden cuestiones relacionadas con políticas y con tecnologías también, con lógicas estatales y técnicas que no contemplan los impactos diferenciados por género, lo que introduce y refuerza sesgos y vulnerabilidades que son sociales, pero que se mantienen en el ámbito técnico. Esa brecha y esas brechas son reconocidas en el informe y son una barrera importante. Otro tiene que ver con la importante brecha de participación y de capacidades en general en distintos niveles del desarrollo social, tanto en el ámbito productivo, pero también en lo que se refiere a los equipos técnicos y diplomáticos y los equipos encargados en la formulación de políticas públicas, puede obstaculizar la eficacia de las respuestas que tengan sensibilidad de género. Y el informe insiste en la importancia del fortalecimiento de capacidades sensibles al género y en la inclusión de sociedad civil y de organizaciones con representación de intereses de género y organizaciones de mujeres también en el diseño y en la implementación de políticas. Creo que hay un par de cosas que son importantes también para pasar a la acción y que son hoy por hoy barreras en proceso de superación. Uno tiene que ver con el déficit de información desagregada y de medición de esos impactos diferenciados, de esos incidentes y de las respuestas que puedan ser diferenciadas cuando puedan ser presentadas como neutrales cuando no lo son. El cerrar las brechas de información es crucial para entender dónde están los puntos débiles, los puntos sensibles para la implementación de marcos de mayor seguridad que protejan a todas las personas. Y de la misma forma, el pensar en cómo esa falta de información puede invisibilizar fenómenos, puede conllevar a la ineficacia de la implementación de normas. Y finalmente, porque buena parte de la enorme producción que existe en materia de ciberseguridad puede estar muy centrada en principios y en nociones de alto nivel, siendo necesario un trabajo muy concreto de conversión, de implementación en caracteres prácticos. El informe, además de incluir recomendaciones prácticas, lleva consigo también una serie de preguntas guía que son importantes, no solamente para los tomadores de decisión o formuladores de políticas públicas, sino también pensando en la incorporación de esos otros actores relevantes, esas otras organizaciones, entidades o sectores que puedan también comprender estos fenómenos y estas incidencias con esa misma sensibilidad de forma tal que ese diálogo multisectorial sea más enriquecido también. ¿Cómo ayuda el informe a responder a estos desafíos? Creo que es una pregunta que viene asociada también al trabajo que muchas organizaciones, incluidas, por cierto, derechos digitales, pero también otras con alcance global, como APC, donde se desempeña Verónica, como otras organizaciones en el consorcio al sur en América Latina, llevan adelante trabajos de recolección de información y de incidencia en políticas públicas. El informe muy deliberadamente habla de la reinterpretación de las normas no vinculantes con un enfoque de género, de forma tal de hacer que éstas tengan un alcance que sea más efectivo en la protección de las personas y de sus derechos, y en definitiva de la protección del ciberespacio como un entorno seguro. Pero al mismo tiempo introduce, y es ahí uno de los valores más relevantes, el de las recomendaciones operativas para cada norma, con recomendaciones concretas de implementación. Es nuestra opinión en derechos digitales que esta clase de esfuerzos pueden servir a que aquellos casos que podemos tomar como ejemplares puedan no solamente ser copiados, sino más bien trasladados a realidades que puedan ser distintas a lo largo de la región y muy posiblemente también a nivel mundial. Como fue destacado en el informe y en la pregunta por Renata, el caso chileno aparece como un caso ejemplar. Derechos Digitales participó en la Política Nacional de Ciberseguridad 2017-2022. Estamos conscientes del proceso de evaluación de esa política y de las limitaciones que encontró ese proceso de evaluación, como también celebramos que la Política Nacional de Ciberseguridad 2023-2028 incorpore un eje transversal de género, como también que incorpore desde esa mirada mayor posibilidad de implementar medidas sensibles y relacionadas con el género, haciendo, por tanto, eco de las recomendaciones que fueron recibidas por la autoridad. A eso se suman, por cierto, los desafíos que pueden ser ayudados por informes como este. Hace muy poco, hace algunas semanas, apareció el plan de acción para implementar la Política Nacional de Ciberseguridad de Chile. Y si bien incluye unas primeras 15 medidas, muchas otras medidas fueron discutidas por la autoridad en sus propias reuniones, y por tanto existe todavía una enorme oportunidad de, desde los distintos sectores, hacer intervenciones o hacer alguna recomendación adicional que permita que esas acciones tengan también esa sensibilidad de género. Desde Derechos Digitales creemos que el aporte que podemos hacer como organización está no solamente en tratar de conectar distintos procesos de política pública con recomendaciones que hay y que se emiten, por ejemplo, a propósito de este informe, sino también conectar con la experiencia de las personas que trabajan con nosotras, en la información que recogemos, en informes como el informe de hace algunos meses sobre líneas de ayuda para incidentes de violencia de género en línea, en la realización de intervenciones a propósito de los procesos a nivel ONU o a nivel, por ejemplo, no solamente de ciberseguridad, sino también de cibercrimen, o bien en las instancias en que participa Derechos Digitales para la implementación de consideraciones de derechos humanos en la realización de políticas públicas vinculadas con tecnología en general y que puedan conllevar necesidades de mayor inclusión. Así que desde Derechos Digitales celebramos el lanzamiento de este informe también en español. Esperamos que sea una herramienta útil, como también esperamos darle una mayor utilidad en nuestro propio trabajo de incidencia. Y una vez más, felicitamos que este esfuerzo sea presentado hoy. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos, for your kind words about the research, but also for sharing, your experience working in this area. What are the challenges, and sharing a bit about the different policy frameworks you have in Chile, how the most recent one applies a gender perspective, as a transversal element. But then you also need to put that in practice. So, as you said, a huge opportunity that you have ahead of you. And you can count on us if there's anything, we can do to help. Please count on us. Now I would like to hear from Rosario Gutierrez, who is a diplomat from Colombia. And Rosario, could you share? Colombia has been very active in terms of mainstreaming gender across, international security issues, including cybersecurity. Could you share an overview of Colombia's main actions in this regard, and your thoughts and opportunities about the next steps in terms of the cybersecurity processes. As we heard, there will be a global mechanism on ICTs. Do you see an opportunity for bringing gender considerations into that new the global mechanism?
Muchas gracias, Renata, por tu pregunta. Y bueno, de antemano un agradecimiento a los organizadores por esta invitación. Buenos días, buenas tardes a todos. Es un gusto de verdad para mí estar acá hoy abordando dos temas que son absolutamente relevantes y centrales para Colombia, pero pues también muy cercanos a mi corazón. Entonces, para responder tu pregunta, quisiera empezar por señalar que Colombia ha estado muy comprometida en integrar la perspectiva de género en sus políticas y en las prácticas que tenemos sobre ciberseguridad. Y en particular quisiera destacar tres niveles en los que hemos trabajado. El primero es el nivel estratégico, el segundo es el nivel programático, en un sentido como de los programas o digamos de las políticas de los estados, y el tercero es digamos, un nivel multilateral. Para iniciar, pues en el plano estratégico, tanto la posición nacional sobre la aplicación del derecho internacional del ciberespacio, como la estrategia nacional que tenemos en materia de seguridad digital, incorporan de manera explícita un enfoque de género. Y eso ha significado que para nosotros la seguridad digital no es únicamente una protección de infraestructuras o de datos, sino que también la entendemos como una garantía de un uso seguro, inclusivo, equitativo de las TIC. Y en ese sentido, para Colombia, cerrar la brecha digital de género es una condición necesaria para poder lograr esa conectividad universal y para poder reducir las desigualdades y pues alcanzar los objetivos de desarrollo sostenibles. En el segundo plano, que es el de los programas de gobierno, es muy importante señalar que en Colombia hemos desarrollado iniciativas que están específicamente dirigidas a mujeres y que buscan de alguna manera abrir oportunidades y fortalecer las capacidades en el ámbito digital y en el ámbito de la ciberseguridad. Entre ellas quiero destacar dos. La primera se llama Hacker Girls, que es un programa que apoya a mujeres que están interesadas en la ciberseguridad a través de formación y a través incluso de vinculación laboral. Busca también como unas oportunidades en materia laboral para ellas. Y el segundo se llama Por TIC Mujer, que es como hay un juego de palabras, no sé cómo se entenderá en la traducción. Es un poco por ti mujer, pero reemplaza la palabra ti por TIC, los ICTs, que está liderado por el Ministerio de las TIC y que ofrece cursos gratuitos y certificados para que las mujeres de todo el país y en especial pues busca que aquellas de zonas rurales, de zonas apartadas, puedan ser protagonistas en el uso y en la apropiación del Internet. Estas iniciativas, pues yo creo que muestran que la política pública realmente puede tener un impacto directo y un impacto concreto en la reducción de brechas y en la construcción de un ecosistema que sea pues mucho más inclusivo a nivel digital. En el plano multilateral o internacional, nosotros hemos celebrado y hemos participado activamente en iniciativas que fomentan la participación de mujeres como por ejemplo el fellowship que mencionaban antes, que es el de Women in Cyber, que ha sido impulsado por Canadá y pues que, como les digo, fomenta una participación femenina equitativa en foros globales sobre ciberseguridad. Ese esfuerzo realmente ha tenido resultados tangibles. Mi colega Laura fue fellow de Women in Cyber y digamos gracias a ese proceso pudimos ambas dos mujeres liderar desde la Cancillería no solo la participación en el OIWG, sino también la elaboración y la construcción del documento de la Posición Nacional sobre la aplicación del derecho internacional al ciberespacio. Ella lo hizo desde lo político y yo lo hice, digamos, desde la perspectiva jurídica. Y esta experiencia demuestra que las iniciativas internacionales en materia de género no son solo de capacitación, sino que realmente generan un liderazgo real de las mujeres en espacios de decisión tanto nacional como internacional. Y de hecho el OIWG, pues que ya lo han mencionado ampliamente, se convirtió de alguna manera en un escenario que ha sido pionero en integrar compromisos de género en sus informes, pero sobre todo en promover activamente la participación significativa de las mujeres en sus sesiones. Y yo pienso que esto no puede concluir una vez pues que ya concluyó ahorita en julio, que fue su última sesión. Y en ese sentido, para transicionar un poquito hacia la segunda parte de tu pregunta, yo quiero destacar el documento sobre género y el futuro mecanismo que fue presentado por varias delegaciones, incluida Colombia en el marco del OIWG. Ese documento, además de señalar el estado de cosas en relación con el género y la paz, pues, y digamos la agenda de paz y seguridad, los compromisos de Naciones Unidas, el desarrollo en el OIWG, realmente ofrece propuestas muy concretas sobre cómo el nuevo mecanismo puede incorporar de manera estructural la perspectiva de género. Entre ellas, pues para destacarles algunas, está recolectar y publicar datos sobre la participación de mujeres en las reuniones, integrar acciones de género en el checklist de normas voluntarias, asegurar la participación de organizaciones de la sociedad civil que están especializadas en género y ciberseguridad, consolidar programas de creación de capacidades sensibles al género similares a las que ya les mencioné, como este programa de Women in Cyber, y que permita tener como herramientas prácticas para que los estados puedan identificar y superar esas brechas. Nosotros pensamos que este paper es una hoja de ruta muy valioso para el diseño del futuro mecanismo, porque así como mencionaban antes, asegura que a un nivel práctico y no solamente discursivo, los logros que ya alcanzamos en el OIWG no se pierdan, sino que se puedan consolidar y se puedan fortalecer e incluso ampliar. Entonces, brevemente, pues para resumir y partiendo de la base de que este mecanismo debe tener entre sus prioridades la incorporación sistemática de la perspectiva de género, nosotros consideramos que el mecanismo sí o sí deberá continuar trabajando en la reducción de la brecha, no solo en el acceso, sino también en las habilidades y oportunidades de participación. Deberá también promover la participación que sea plena, igualitaria, pero sobre todo significativa de las mujeres en la toma de decisiones sobre el uso de tecnologías en el ámbito de la seguridad internacional. Y pues reconocer que la seguridad del ciberespacio no va a ser efectiva si no es también inclusiva, diversa y sobre todo sensible a las diferentes experiencias de quienes pues lo habitamos. Entonces, bueno, para concluir, yo pienso que la experiencia de Colombia muestra que realmente integrar la perspectiva de género en temas de ciberseguridad no solo es un ejercicio retórico, sino realmente una práctica que ha sido posible y que ha sido transformadora. Nosotros lo hemos hecho pues en esas estrategias nacionales, en programas concretos, en nuestra participación internacional y creo que el reto ahora es precisamente llevar ese mismo compromiso al futuro mecanismo global y lograr que este se construya desde el inicio con un ADN que sea inclusivo, que sea diverso y que sea verdaderamente representativo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Rosario, for outlining all the efforts that Colombia has participated and contributed to in the context of the OEWG and the working paper about the global mechanism. Yes, I think there is a lot of work to be done. We shouldn't lose what we have, managed to achieve so far. And I think one part of this is also collaborating with civil society that was also highlighted in your response. So now I would like to turn to Alison Pitlack to also get her views on the role of civil society in gender mainstreaming in cybersecurity policy and practice. But also if you have thoughts, Alison, on the things that the previous speakers said, thoughts about the report, we would like to hear from you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Renata, and thank you to UNIDIR and the OAS for including me in today's event. My name is Alison Pitlack, and I am the Cyber Program Director at the Stimson Center, which is a research institute based in Washington, D.C. But I first became interested in and actively researching this intersection of cyber and gender several years ago when I was working with a different organization, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which regularly brings feminist and gender analysis to security issues. And as cyber has grown in prominence as an international, national, and human security issue, with that has come a lot more interest in understanding the gendered impacts of technological misuse and cyber operations, the unique diversity challenges of the sector. And so I feel that this report is extremely timely. It really does fill a huge gap in the literature and the policy landscape. And so my biggest congratulations to Veronica, to Kate, and to everyone involved. Now, to your question about the role of civil society, I think that, and Renata, you might have thoughts on this too, that just as we see in other sort of traditional security areas, civil society is often at the forefront of trying to mainstream gender and promote inclusive policies and practices. And we have been really since day one. And I think that's because civil society offers a lot of firsthand and on-the-ground perspectives, as well as the ability to contribute expertise. And this could be from the perspective of being users of ICTs, of being builders of ICTs, but also as individuals and communities that are being adversely affected by ICTs on the basis of gender. But without governmental partnerships and champions and engagement from the private sector or other actors, our efforts will not go further than our own community. So in my experience, the best results, whether it's on gender and inclusivity or other areas, has always come from such cross-sectoral partnerships and cooperation. I wanted to sort of lift up 3 specific roles that I think civil society has really played. There are probably many more, and I want to also acknowledge that I think there's a lot of important work being done at the grassroots level or on the front lines that maybe doesn't always percolate up to our UN conversations. But, you know, in thinking about the work that's sort of happening at the multilateral level, I feel like there are really sort of 3 distinct roles for civil society. First has been building the evidence base. We have helped to build a really robust evidence base through a lot of different research approaches, including quantitative data collection, but also qualitative insights that really help to demonstrate the gendered impact of cyber threats, build bridges between feminist theory and our lived realities of gender stereotypes, and to also document gender-based discrimination and diversity challenges as it relates to technology. And this evidence base has been crucial in helping to move gender considerations from being a sort of fringe issue or a peripheral concern to one of the more central and now regularly discussed elements of cybersecurity policy and discussions. And, you know, just as one example, back in 2019 at the first open-ended working group, when Canada and some other member states began to first think about how to do this, they realized that there wasn't actually a sufficient evidence base at the time about gender in the context of international cybersecurity. There's a lot of great work being done about women's human rights online, TFGBV, digital divides, but what was really challenging was that sort of problem framing of these issues or lifting up new case studies and evidence in the context of the topics that the open-ended working group is covering. And that's why at the time, Canada commissioned research from myself and from Deborah Brown, who was then at APC, now is at Human Rights Watch, to really kind of help get the ball rolling on this. I feel like the available literature has only continued to grow, whether it's from groups like APC that have always been at the forefront of this, Global Partners Digital and its toolkit on inclusive cyber norm making, the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy's work on militarism and feminist perspectives, so much great work from Access Now. ICT for Peace has also done a lot about linking up the WP's and Women, Peace and Security agenda with cyber, and of course the many reports that UNIDIR has published and commissioned over the years as well. Second area would be advocacy, which is really just about putting that evidence base to work in order to achieve the change or collective vision that we have. You know, I think this advocacy can of course take a lot of forms, but when I sort of look around the multilateral cyber policy landscape, a few examples that stand out is the really great work done by Chatham House and specifically also by Kate during the cybercrime treaty negotiations, as well as many other organizations, putting out position papers, analyzing the draft treaty text for gaps and loopholes, but also, you know, suggesting where the language is good and where it needs to be protected. And I think that similar activities have been undertaken many times in the context of the open-ended working group and its release of annual reports or its discussion of specific thematic items. For example, gender-sensitive capacity building. What does it actually mean in practice? And I think that, as Juan Carlos and others have mentioned, civil society has also done a lot to try to influence and elevate issues of inclusion, gender, and digital security in non-cyber fora too, including human rights treaty bodies, their peer review processes, and also in developing national action plans on women, peace, and security. And then the last bucket that many other speakers have touched on, of course, is in building capacity. I think this can be done through publishing our research and position papers, but also, you know, through participating in more direct ways, trainings, the Women in Cyber program, regional trainings by the OSCE, the OAS, and many other actors as well. I did want to come in just a little bit looking ahead on the global mechanism, but before I do that, I did want to also share that in thinking through all the great work that's happened and the good strides that have been made in this area, I wanted to share that the Stimson Center is partnering with UNIDIR towards the publication of a compendium on best practices in gender mainstreaming and cybersecurity. We're about to run 5 online workshops, consultations really, on 4 distinct topics as a way to hear from the broader community about your good work, your good practice, but also some of the challenges that you've come up against. And I think that many in the audience today are probably about to get an invitation to participate in those, but there will also be a lot of opportunities for written input as well. And we hope to launch this in March of 2026, probably at the organizing meeting of the new global mechanism. So just to say a few quick words on that as well. You know, the point that I wasn't going to lead off on, but I think does need saying, is that we're obviously in this time right now where we've had a lot of great progress on gender, but there is a backlash and against gender, whether it's the term or the concept itself, or as well as associated meanings and terminologies. So I do think that as we pivot from the working group into the global mechanism, it's really important that supportive countries and organizations not only continue to be vocal, but also to coordinate with one another and really identify what are the gender-related priorities for work going forward. This might not be the time to boil the ocean for like a whole lot of new ideas and gains. What are our shared priorities? And maybe one way to do that is to establish an informal gender champions group. We know that these exist in other fora who regularly meet and connect online or in person to exchange, to support one another, to identify common priorities, and so forth. I also think we need to continue to feed and build that evidence base. Technology is changing fast. There's constantly new research and information coming online. How can we harness that in a way that will serve the new global mechanism and its desire to be an action-oriented mechanism? We know that the OEWGs had tremendous success in inclusive participation, largely in part to the Women in Cyber program. I don't know if that will be continued into the new global mechanism or not, but regardless, I think that the GMAC could seek to uphold gender diversity by committing to gender balanced delegations and expert panels, advocating for diversity in the facilitators of the thematic working groups. Maybe it's time also for a female chair of the new global mechanism as well, and think through some of the other barriers that could prevent participation. And then just the very last point is to come back to where we started today in talking about the report and implementing the norms in a gender sensitive way. I think it's a wonderful thing to have published this gender analysis because the norms are the backbone and a foundational element in the UN framework for responsible cyber behavior. So how do we ensure that the great suggestions and the guidance contained in this report get put to use? The High Representative gave several good suggestions, which I agree with. I also take note of Kate's point earlier about the importance of monitoring and evaluation. We say we want to do these things, but are we actually doing them? And what does that look like? Or if we can't, why not? So just a couple of ideas to throw out there, I think, is, furthering the very specific guidance and guidelines from the report, member states could use the plenaries or other opportunities to report back on the relevant steps that they are taking at national or regional levels. Using places like the Cyber Policy Portal or the new GMAC portal to publish written updates on national or regional efforts to implement norms in a gender-sensitive way. And then lastly, I think that there is a lot of scope for using voluntary templates or the voluntary checklist on norms and other resources we've seen in other non-cyber fora, but First Committee issues where integrating gender into even voluntary reporting has really helped become a good baseline for identifying good practice and gaps. So I'll stop there and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Alison, for sharing your thoughts, your very concrete suggestions, and all this important reflection about the role of civil society. I agree with you. Civil society has been at the forefront of the efforts to bring gender considerations into international security. And, you know, they provide a lot of the, as you said, the evidence base, the knowledge. I think if you look at Kate and Veronica's report, there is a lot of information that come from civil society sources. It wouldn't have been possible to do this analysis without the work that civil society organizations do. And we need to find ways also to be able to sustain that work, support, expand, make it more systematic. I think this was something that Juan Carlos mentioned at the beginning, the lack of gender disaggregated data about the impacts of cybersecurity incidents. It is something that hinders a bit the conversation. But yeah, we can also learn from other international security processes, as you said, Alison. Some of the other processes have gender focal points. So that could also be an idea for the upcoming cyber process, where states take this role, a voluntary role of being the gender focal point for a specific period within the process. And as you said, voluntary reporting, we see this in other processes as well. So that these are all great ideas. I would like to give the floor back to Kate and Veronica, but to share, I mean, their also thoughts on what they heard from our three speakers. But we've also been collecting questions in the Q&A box. And some of them are very interesting. People also expressing interest in more training in this area, and specifically asking if the OAS can help with this training. Someone also asked if Rosario could share the link to the initiatives that she mentioned in Colombia, even the one that had the pun, por tic mujer. So I think, you know, like people in the audience, they are really paying attention and wanting to learn more. I think before giving the floor to Kate and Veronica, just to highlight a few topics that came up in the Q&A box. I think people are interested in capacity building that also starts from an early age. I think people are, someone mentioned here, you know, from the infancy, if you can already start to address the gender gap by if you come across, for instance, good practices in that regard. Indigenous groups as well, if there are good practices in including also indigenous groups. And then what is it? Yeah, okay, another one about infancia, about the early ages, how we integrate that I think like the age and gender, right, perspective. Yes, I think I'll leave it to that and see if Kate and Veronica would like to share some additional thoughts.
Puedo empezar. Sé que no tenemos tanto tiempo, pero primero agradecerles a Juan Carlos, a Rosario y a Alison por los comentarios y por algunas cosas que estuve anotando y ideas súper concretas de qué se puede hacer en el mecanismo global y cómo seguir esas conversaciones a nivel multilateral. En el reporte hay algunas recomendaciones más a nivel general que pueden tomar procesos internacionales, pero un poco también construyendo en la investigación. Luego con APC y con Kate hicimos un aporte para la última sesión del Open Ended Working Group con algunas ideas en concreto que se pueden tomar para integrar género en discusiones, en los plenarios, en las reuniones, esto de tener datos sobre participación. Muchas de estas recomendaciones también fueron mencionadas tanto por Rosario, en el aporte que hicieron varias delegaciones, como por Alison. Así que es genial saber esto de que estamos en la misma página con muchos actores y la idea de Alison de tener algún tipo de coordinación informal de organizaciones y de champions en temas de género de cara al mecanismo global me parece una gran idea. Después hablemos de eso. Así que genial. Y la importancia de la cuestión de la evidencia, como también lo mencionó Juan Carlos y en varias investigaciones, y Alison también en su intervención. De nuevo, nuestra investigación se apoya mucho en evidencia recolectada por sociedad civil, por ejemplo, también por la Fundación Carisma, está citada en el reporte, y claramente las recomendaciones es la necesidad, como decías Renata, de que las organizaciones de sociedad civil puedan continuar este trabajo de manera sostenida. Y creo que un punto, antes de terminar, que aparece también en los comentarios de la audiencia, tiene que ver con que hablaban de cuestiones de edad, de comunidades indígenas, y si bien estamos en un contexto, como decía Alison, de backlash en temas de género, y es importante establecer prioridades y coordinarnos, pero el informe tiene un foco interseccional, las recomendaciones también tienen que ver con ir más allá de género y pensar en otras aspectos que interseccionan nuestras identidades y pensar en investigación que también debería ahondar más en efectos interseccionales de grandes ciberincidentes. Esa es una de nuestras recomendaciones en el informe y creemos que también hay necesidad de más de ese tipo de evidencia. Nada más de mi lado. Simplemente de nuevo, gracias por los aportes de las panelistas y el panelista. Y muchas gracias.
Thank you, Vero. And thank you again, so much to the panelists for your comments and your insights and your expertise, and also for your close and generous engagement with the report, which that's a gift. We appreciate it very much. In terms of the questions, I will try and be brief. In terms of age and capacity building, I think that's a wonderful question. And I would say that based on my familiarity with the existing research, I'd say that it's quite context specific, and it actually probably requires some gender and age disaggregated data to help us understand what's driving the digital gender gap in particular contexts. So in some contexts, we're talking about resources and access. In other contexts, we're talking about literacy and like self-conception and skill, and the policy interventions for those two sort of ways of thinking about the digital divide are related but not identical. And so I would say, like, you're very right. And also we need to ask there's a couple questions that we can answer that need to answer before giving a more specific sort of solution, while also noting that a decent amount of research now is actually showing that for sort of obvious reasons, elderly people or older adults are partially what's driving the digital divide and indeed the gender digital divide. In a variety of ways. And so we would want to look at sort of both ends of the age spectrum in terms of thinking about robust access and inclusion. I love the question about Indigenous communities and cybersecurity. And I would say that in the report, we try and sort of flag and hold space for where we hope more detailed knowledge will plug in as it is generated. In terms of an example of good practice off the top of my head, with apologies that it's not from the Americas, but the NGO policy, there's an African NGO in Uganda has done some really interesting work on Afrofeminist cybersecurity, ICT governance, and data policy that I think is a pretty incredible example of both good data use and emphasizing for Indigenous communities and marginalized communities the importance of really good data, right? The dangers of being excluded from cybersecurity and ICT knowledge creation and production. And also the flip side of the importance of Indigenous data sovereignty, right? And having control, ownership, and privacy over the way that information is used. So I suggest their work. And then to sort of wrap up and bring it back to the panel, I guess I would suggest, and this is not in relation to a question directly, but when thinking about how do we exist together in solidarity, try and preserve some of our gains in a context where this work seems to be getting harder and experiencing more friction, as I would suggest that particularly in cyber and ICTs, we talk about this quite a lot in the report, the women, peace, and security agenda is an undertapped and underutilized resource. It's a policy agenda with as far as it goes, solid resourcing, an existing network, and knowledge base that I think would really mutually benefit from greater integration with the cybersecurity and digital rights community, and noting that they're also continuing to hold on to a really inclusive and intersectional understanding what gender and security policy making means. And so I'd sort of invite everyone to think about how we can do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate and Vero, not only for answering, but for opening up the conversation to other issues that we should consider moving forward. We are approaching the end of the time we had allocated for this event. I just wanted to give an opportunity if any of the speakers would like to come back and complement or say any final words. You have this opportunity. If not, I would like to thank you all very much. This has been very interesting, and I hope you will read the report, share, and also invite Kate, invite Vero to brief or participate in other events and help us disseminate this work, in other parts of the Americas and beyond. I think the case studies in this case were focused in the Americas, but that's an open invitation for people also to, find case studies and expand the dialogue towards other regions as well. Before I conclude, I really need to thank my colleagues, partners in crime at the OAS. Thank you so much for the partnership. This has been another joint event, OAS and UNIDIR, and it's always a pleasure to work with all of you. And thank you to the speakers who have made time to be with us today. I know everyone is super busy, and I really appreciate everyone making time. And just to conclude, wishing everyone again a good day, good afternoon, good evening. Take care. Bye-bye.